In the early 1860s, the then Emperor of Abyssinia, Tewodros II, was under a lot of pressure. Most of his country was in rebellion, and he needed help. He wrote to all the powerful leaders in Europe, including Queen Victoria, asking for military assistance, but got no satisfactory response. In 1863, he decided to take matters into his own hands. It was not a good idea. Enraged by the apparent snub from the Europeans, Tewodros started taking hostages. The first, Henry Stern, a British missionary, in October 1863, where he was beaten and imprisoned, together with a Mr. Rosenthal, his assistant. The British consul, Charles Duncan Cameron, and some missionaries all interceded on behalf of the imprisoned pair, and for a while it seemed as though they might succeed. But on the 2nd of January 1864, Cameron was arrested, along with his staff. The British government sent Hormuz Razam, an ethnic Assyrian Christian from Mesopotamia, to negotiate a solution to the crisis, but after initial optimism, he too was made a prisoner. The emperor eventually moved all his European hostages to his fortress at Magdala, and continued to negotiate with the British government until, on the 21st of August 1867, the British ran out of patience, and Queen Victoria announced the decision to send a military expedition to rescue them. Abyssinia, located in the Horn of Africa and, today, part of the larger country of Ethiopia, presented the British with huge problems. Once there, they would have to cross 400 miles of mountainous terrain in inhospitable weather to reach Tewodros' mountainous fortress at Magdala. The man given command of the task was Lieutenant General Sir Robert Napier of the Royal Engineers, and, as an engineer, Napier had a keen appreciation of the difficulties he faced. Given the geography involved, the army was raised entirely from troops stationed in India. Napier's army consisted of 13,000 fighting men from various Indian regiments and British regiments, including cavalry from the 3rd Dragoon Guards and men from the 11th Hussars, and infantry regiments, the 33rd and 45th Foot. Later they would be joined by a naval brigade formed from men from the transport ships. Such was the nature of the expedition that along with the soldiers came some 40,000 animals that were needed for transport, including 44 elephants. Employing a fleet of 280 steam and sailing ships, the troops sailed from Bombay on the 21st of December 1867 and crossed the Arabian Sea before navigating the Red Sea to the Gulf of Zula. Here they established a base camp from where they would march inland. The advance began on the 26th of January and was combined with diplomatic efforts. In a move that Wellington would have approved of, Napier was careful to negotiate with the local population and assure them of his intent. All forage and food was to be paid for in full and the people treated with respect. This assured that his army reached its target unmolested. It took the British forces 3 months to trek over 400 miles of mountainous terrain to the foot of the Emperor's fortress at Magdala, but finally in early April 1868 they arrived outside the fortress. There they were met by thousands of armed Ethiopian soldiers camped around the hillside with up to 30 artillery pieces. As the British formed up, the Emperor ordered an attack and thousands of his soldiers, many of them armed only with spears, charged the British positions. The British quickly deployed to meet them and poured devastating fire into their ranks, including rockets from the Naval Brigade. After a 90-minute chaotic battle, the defeated Ethiopians retreated back to Magdala. In total, about 800 Ethiopian warriors were killed and 1,500 wounded, most of them seriously, while on the British side there were only 20 casualties, 2 of which later died. The following day the British advanced towards Magdala. The Emperor released 2 hostages to discuss terms. Napier insisted on the release of all the hostages and unconditional surrender. Tewodros refused to surrender. However, he did release the European hostages over the next 2 days, at the same time as he brutally murdered his native hostages. The British continued their advance and laid siege to the fortress. The British attack began with a bombardment of mortars, rockets and artillery. Infantry units then opened fire to provide cover for the Royal Engineers as they blew up the first set of gates. British infantry then poured in and advanced with fixed bayonets, forcing the defenders to retreat to a second gate. The British then advanced and took the second gate, where they found Tewodros dead inside. He had committed suicide with a pistol that, ironically, had been a gift from Queen Victoria. The casualties in the Battle of Magdala were comparatively small. The British artillery's bombardment killed about 20 Ethiopians and wounded about 120 more. A further 45 Ethiopians were killed by rifle fire during the infantry assault. Altogether, British troops' casualties included only 15 wounded. Before the British abandoned Magdala, Napier ordered the destruction of Tewodros' artillery. He also permitted the troops to loot and burn the fortress, including its churches. The troops collected many historical and religious artifacts that were taken back to Britain, many of which can still be seen today in the British Museum. 15 elephants and almost 200 mules were required to carry away the loot. Following the destruction of Magdala, the British began to retrace their steps back to Zula. On their way, they rewarded tribal leaders for their assistance with guns, ammunition and other supplies. By the 2nd of June, the base camp had been dismantled and men and hostages loaded onto ships, leaving behind very little trace of them ever having been there. The expedition was hailed as a success by the British public, and Napier was made Baron Napier of Magdala by Queen Victoria. On the 1st of March 1869, a medal was sanctioned for all those that took part in the expedition. The Abyssinian War Medal is unlike any of its Victorian campaign medal cousins. Still made from fine silver and with a diameter of 32 mm, it is smaller than its forerunners. The obverse, designed by brothers Joseph and Alfred Wyon, shows an effigy of Queen Victoria, facing left, wearing a crown and a veil. She is surrounded by an ornate 9-pointed star. Between each point is one of the letters that together spell out the word Abyssinia. Within the star's points there is a floral ornamentation. The reverse of the medal has a blank central space for the recipient's name and unit, surrounded by a laurel wreath. Above the medal disc is an imperial crown, above that a ring with which the medal is suspended from its ribbon. The ribbon is 38 mm wide, white with broad red stripe down the middle. The medal is unique in that the recipient's name and unit were embossed on the reverse, rather than the usual practice of the name being impressed around the rim. This feature required that the dies for the reverse had a removable centre, so that each recipient's medal could be minted individually. This made the production of the medals very expensive, and thus this style of naming was never used again. Approximately 12,000 medals were eventually awarded to the British and Indian Army, with a further 2,000 to the Navy. In a return to normality, following the New Zealand medal, all naval personnel received the medal regardless of their level of involvement in the land operations. The medal shown here was awarded to Sergeant Charles Badger of the 26th Regiment of Foot. Not part of the initial army that left India in December 1867, the 26th were part of a follow-up echelon of the force, and landed at Zula on the 31st of March 1868. They marched inland towards Magdala, halting after a few days, and, after a month of waiting, received notice that the war had ended. The regiment fell back to the coast, boarded ships for Bombay, and arrived there on the 11th of June. Charles Badger was born in Warwickshire in 1839, the son of a labourer. Enlisting in the 68th Foot in 1856, he transferred to the 26th 3 years later. As well as Abyssinia, he served 9 years in the East Indies. The Abyssinian War Medal was his only campaign award. He served for a total of 22 years before being discharged in 1878. He went on to be a sergeant in the militia and a school caretaker. He married his wife, Mary, in Scotland in 1880 before moving to Coventry, where they lived until his death in 1914. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time when we go to Canada, where they are having some problems with the Irish.